Hey guys, welcome to another crafty video. Today we're going to do something a little different from the norm. Normally I would show you guys some kind of craft project that you could do, but today we're going to talk about a software. We're going to talk about the software that I use when I do digital art as a hobby or when I do graphic design or digital work for work. And that software is called Krita. So why am I telling you about a software today instead of giving you a project to try? Well, this is to prepare you for our next project, which is going to be pattern design or surface design. And what we're going to be doing with pattern design or surface design is we're going to be taking inspiration from some of the books in our special collections located in the Montgomery Room. Krita is a really awesome software. It is completely free and open source. If you don't know what open source means, that means that the code used to make up the software is completely open and available to anybody who wants to look at it or learn from it or use it in any kind of way, make changes to it, distribute it. They have blanket permission from the person who has the copyright for the software. Unlike some free software, Krita is actually a professional grade digital art software. The very first graphic design or digital art software that I learned how to use was actually Photoshop, and I learned how to use Photoshop when I was working on my college degree because it was part of my required classes for my degree in advertising. So I was very, very familiar with Photoshop and with the things that Photoshop can do. But for digital art purposes, Krita is super awesome. With Krita, you can do digital art. You can also do a little bit of coding with Krita if you use Python. You can animate things in Krita, and Krita even has Photoshop file support, even for older versions of Photoshop files that the newest versions of Photoshop might not be able to open anymore. So in this video, I'm going to go over what Krita is and how to use it just at the most base level so that you can follow along with the next series of videos that we do. I'm not going to go over every single part of Krita, partially because we would be here for a few hours if I went over every single feature that Krita has to offer, and partially because some of those features, like the Python code writing, I'm not familiar with because I don't write code. I have Krita website's homepage pulled up for you. Unlike a lot of free softwares, Krita isn't just a one and done version. It's very frequently updated, and they're very open with the things that get changed in each new version. You can even use an older version if you don't like a new update or there's some kind of bug. Krita is available on Windows, on Mac, and on Linux. I'm on a Mac computer today because that's what I have at work. The computer I use at home is a Windows computer, and the interface between Windows and Macs is not too terribly different. Krita also has an Android app version available right now. It's in beta. It's very early access. It's only available for tablets and Chromebooks, so it's not yet mobile compatible. If you want to try that out, you can find it in the Google Play Store. Krita has an awesome website to go with it. You can see on the home page, if all you want to do is download the software and get started, you can do that by clicking on Get Krita Now. It'll take you to a download page. I'm on the Mac, so the one that's on the top right here is the one that I would need. If you are on any other version, it does have Windows and Linux. You can find that just by going to all download versions. What you're going to want to do is click the one you want. It's going to automatically download. Now, because I do have Krita already installed on this computer, I'm not going to let it finish downloading. But just like any other software you would install on your computer, once this downloads, you open it and you will have an installation wizard that will pretty much do everything for you and walk you through the process. But before I open the software, I want to show you a few things on Krita's website that you might find really, really useful. They have an artist community. It's called kritaartist.org, and I've pulled that up for you on your screen. You can find artwork made with the Krita software. There's also links to tutorials and resources, as well as contests and games and collabs. One of my favorite things about this part of the site is the gallery, where you can find artwork done using Krita. It's really neat. It's worth looking at if you like art. So let's go on to the actual software. I want to reiterate again, I'm not going to go over every single feature and tool involved in the software. partially because I don't use all of those features or tools, and partially because we aren't going to need them for any of the things we're going to use Krita for in our graphic design videos or in any future videos. So once you've installed Krita, you open it. It will open with this little piece of artwork, and it'll tell you what version you've got. I'm actually 2 versions behind. This one is the newest version, this 4.3.0. Because this is a work computer, I do not update Krita unless I absolutely have to. So this is what you see when you open Krita. You've got news, links to all of the community stuff. So you have a link out to the user manual, and we're going to click that. If you ever have any kind of problems in Krita, you can go to the user manual. It has pretty much everything you could ever want to know about Krita, from the tools down to basic concepts behind the tools. You can find any new developments in the news, and Krita is very regularly updated. You can see the last bit of news they put out was from the 9th of September, which was actually today at 6:13 a.m. The last version of Krita that was released was June the 18th. If you don't want to see the news, you can just uncheck this box and it will disappear next time you open it. You can see any recent documents you were working on. This document is actually the end card for the tie-dye video that I did. It's the last thing that I worked on this computer. This is the default view of Open New. You've got a lot of templates and options over here on the side. I never use these. There are predefined sizes on this drop-down menu. I'm going to go ahead and use a letter size. That's printer paper size. It's 8.5 by 11 inches. You can set your paper to landscape or portrait. I prefer landscape. It will show you the measurements, and the default is in pixels. Most digital measurements are with pixels, but you can change those to millimeters, centimeters, decimeters, inches, pica, cicero, points, pixels, whatever you need. As a demonstration, I'm going to show you inches. See, it's 8.5 by 11. So if I wanted to, I could have an 11 by 11 inch square. If I was going to do like a poster or something of a specific size, a lot of the time I will plug in whatever size poster I want, and I will go ahead and make it at that size so I can save the file as that size, just so it's easier to print. I don't really ever mess with this down here. If you want to change any of the color modes or depth or profile, you can, but I've been using Krita for a few years now, and this is not something that I bother with. In content, sometimes I do change things in content. You can go ahead and name your document if you want to. The default for Krita is to have 2 layers already active, and that's usually the background layer and one working layer, so I'm going to leave that alone. But what I am going to change is the background color. The last time I worked with Krita, I had it changed to this periwinkle blue color, and then when you're done, you just hit create. This is also the default view of Krita. I don't change a lot in the way that Krita is laid out, especially on this computer. I don't use it a whole lot. This is not the normal computer I use when I'm at work, but even on that one, I don't have a lot of things customized. With Krita, you can customize how the entire software is laid out. We don't really need to do that in order to use Krita for the videos, but I'm going to go ahead and walk you through how to customize the Krita layout in case you decide you want to play with Krita a little bit before those next videos come out. So these are called dockers, and you can move them around anywhere you want. You can pull them out and have them as separate windows if you want to. And if you want to move them, you just hover it over and it will go where it's highlighted. If you want to close one, I'm going to close this preset history here because I don't really use it. You just close it. You can change their size. You can put them in little tabs. Whatever you want to do, you can do. This one is the one that has all of your tools in it. If you want it to be bigger, you can make it bigger. It is going to make your canvas window a lot smaller. I don't normally bother messing with it too terribly much, but you can move it up to the top, or you can move it over here to the side, or you can move it to the bottom if you would like to also. This is good if you are left-handed and you need to change the orientation of anything, you can do that. If you want to get into modifying the workspace even more, you go up to Window and Workspace, and you can explore some of the presets. So if I wanted to do some animation, I could click on the animation preset, and it will give me an optimized setup for doing animation work. I'm going to change it back to the default, which is big paint. If you've never done any kind of digital art before, there's a few things that are fairly universal to digital art that I'm going to explain to you really quick. When you work on most digital art software, you have two colors set. One is the foreground color and one is the background color. With Krita, their default is black and white. You can change them to anything you want at any point in time you want. But if you need to go back to black and white really quick, there's a little icon at the bottom that will default them to black and white. If you need to change the foreground and background color, there's also an arrow that will let you switch the two back and forth. Digital art is done with layers. When you paint a portrait on a canvas with traditional paints, you paint everything right on top of the other. So you have to layer the paints to get the look that you want. With digital art, you have the ability to have those layers isolated and the ability to work on them continuously throughout the process. So if you were painting a portrait, if you put on your first layer and you wanted to go back and change something, you couldn't do that because your first layer is under however many other layers you put on after it. So once you put paint on a canvas, that's it. It's on the canvas. With digital art, that's not necessarily true. As long as you have that layer, you can go back and change things. So this is the layers panel. You can hide a layer without deleting it. If you click on this eye, it makes the layer invisible. You can change the name of a layer, just double click in it and then type whatever name you want. If you have a layer exactly how you want it and you don't want any changes made to it by accident, you can lock the layer. So if I lock this layer, I'm gonna try and draw on it and I can't because I've got this little error message that says layer is locked. You also can't delete a lock layer. So if you're working with lots of layers, which I tend to do, then you can lock a layer that you don't want to accidentally delete or accidentally draw on. If you right click on your layers, you also can change the style, and basically what any of these will do is it will highlight your layer, which is also great if you're working with lots and lots of layers. Again, as I tend to do, I like to sketch whatever I'm working on very roughly in some contrasting color, and I will lock it and turn the opacity down, which makes it kind of see-through, and sketch on top of it. And it helps to know which layers are my sketch layers and which layers are my finish layers, or if I'm working with specific colors for each layer, that helps to know which is which at a quick glance if I highlight similar layers. Now that that's out of the way, we can go over some of the tools that we're going to be using in our future graphic design video. Up here we've got the toolbar. This is where you go to make a new file or open a file or save something. You can also go to File, Save, just like in any other program. You have an undo and redo button. There are keyboard shortcuts for undo and redo, which are the same for any other program, depending on if you're on a Windows or Mac computer. You can find those keyboard shortcuts in the edit menu, undo. On a Mac, it's Command Z, whereas on a Window, it's Control Z. Copy and paste are also fairly universal between softwares. Copy is Control C and paste is Control V. On Mac, it is Command instead of Control. Immediately to the right of the redo and undo buttons, you have the gradient tool. The gradient tool is set to whatever your foreground and background colors are. So right now they're black and white. So you see we have the foreground to transparent. So it's whichever color is in the front all the way to transparent. And then we have foreground to background. And then the rest of these are default. If I wanted to change how the gradient worked, I would click on the one I wanted to change and hit edit. These little arrows edit how the gradient interacts. You can add another color if you want by clicking wherever you want to add the other color and then grab one to add and hit OK. So it will fade from black to blue and then from blue to white, and I can adjust where that fade starts if I want to. In order to use the gradient tool, you need to have the gradient tool selected. And if you hover over a tool, you'll see it says gradient tool, and in parentheses it says G. It's because G is the keyboard shortcut for the gradient tool. So I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on this layer up here because my background layer is locked. I want to use the gradient tool, so I'm going to draw a line with the gradient tool, and the gradient is going to flow in the line that I drew. I'm going to hit the undo button to undo that gradient. And let's say I want the gradient to go vertically. I just draw a vertical line. Now if I start from the bottom up, then it will go from foreground to background color up. I can do a diagonal line if I want to. The gradient tool is a really fun tool, and we're going to use it in our next video. So feel free to play around with that until then. This tells you which brush you have active, and it is also where you can edit the brush settings. If you click on it, I don't ever modify the default brush settings, so it's not something that I bother. You can change which brush you use here or here. I prefer to use the brush docker because I can see all of my brushes all at once and I don't have to open the menu to search for one. There are eraser brushes. They're usually at the top here that will erase for you. But if you don't want to switch to an eraser brush, or if you want to keep the properties of whatever brush you're using, you can click this button here and it will set whatever brush you use to eraser mode so that the brush you use becomes an eraser. And if I click it again, it's gone. This is your opacity level. This determines how opaque your brush strokes are. There's an opacity level on your layers as well, and it just determines how opaque your layer is. You can use the sliding bar, or you can right click to type in a specific value. Size is the same thing. It just controls the size of your brush. You can use the slider bar, or you can use a right click and type in the number you need. Those are brushes. There are all sorts of different types of brushes, and we're going to use a couple of different ones in the next few videos. You've got erasers. This one is just a generic pencil brush. You've got some airbrushes, some that mimic the look of pencils, some that mimic pastels or markers or other types of paint like acrylics. These green ones here mimic watercolor, and I'm going to use those in one of my designs for the next video. We also have some blending brushes, and I do enjoy blending brushes. I'm going to select this watercolor brush to show you how the blending tool works. So if you remember lessons from when you were a little kid and you were learning colors, you remember that red and blue make purple. So you can see with the watercolor, because it's a watercolor brush, it does kind of act like watercolor. It's a little bit opaque and kind of blendy, so it looks a little purple around the edges there. But what I'm going to do with the blend tool is blend them together further and make purple. I do have some footage from the next videos, kind of a little bit of a sneak peek for you guys demonstrating some of these tools. So I'm going to throw up one of those clips for you. The blend tool is probably my absolute favorite tool to use. It's really, 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 really awesome. When I first started with digital art, I struggled with it because when you use traditional art, even when you're just using a pencil and paper, blending is such an important part of the process to get the look that you want and to get a smooth transition, especially if you're doing something like portraiture or landscape where you want it to look natural. You don't want super hard lines. And when I was first learning digital art, when I was still a little kid even, it wasn't the same because I didn't have that blending technique always available to me. But now blending is very standard in most software, and Krita has a very good blend tool. It's not always a good blend tool, depending on the software you use. There's some special effects brushes that we have here. I'm going to use a few of those in one of the designs that we work on next video, and I'll show you some footage of that. There's a few down here that are stars, bubbles. This one is mountains, so it's very fun. Some that are like bushes or grass. So even if you maybe don't have the best artistic skill, or you're worried about drawing with a mouse, which I'm also going to do for all of the pieces that I do in the next few videos. I'm going to draw with a mouse, not with a tablet. They do have these awesome special effects brushes that can kind of help you cheat a little bit. That's the brush tool. The brush tool is the default active tool. It's this little brush right here. You can find all of the tools for Krita on this docker here. Right next to the brush tool is the line tool. So if you ever need to just straight lines, you have a line tool that you can do that with. There's a few shapes available. There's a square tool. There's a circle tool. We have this tool for anything with more than 4 corners. And we have the tool right next to it. They're very, very similar. But the difference between the two is if I stop here and I hit enter, it will close the shape for me. But if I use this one and I stop, it won't close the shape for me. I like to use this one when I'm doing something like drawing buildings, which is going to be one of the designs that I do in the next video. So I've got some footage of that for you guys. The next tool is the Bezier curve tool. I usually just call it the curve tool. It does straight lines, yes, but what it really does is curved lines. And if you hold and pull, you can get a curve. And if you want to close it, you just come back to the start point. You can also control click. It's very useful for when you have something like a drawing you did on pen and paper and you want to scan it in and then outline it on the computer with Krita, and you don't have like a tablet to do that with. You can use the Bezier curve tool to do that. It takes some time. You can do any kind of art you want to without a tablet. It just takes longer. And you don't have pressure sensitivity with a mouse like you would with a tablet and a stylus, which means if you want a line to start very thin and end very thick, you just have to do that manually, but it is possible. The next tool is the freehand path tool. This is great for if you're drawing with a mouse. It smooths out whatever it is you're drawing. You can change exactly how it works by going over to tool options here. Right now it's set to curve, so it wants to smooth parts of the line that are curves. You can have it optimize the curve. So I had that little lump there and it got rid of that and smoothed the curve for me. Here you can change how strong the smoothing is. I can change it to straight and it will optimize my straight lines. You can still draw a curve, but if you aren't careful, it's going to think you want straight lines. So you have to, if you're doing with curves, you do have to be careful. It also has raw. Raw is just general smoothing. The next tool we have is the dynamic brush tools, also really useful for a mouse. When you use a regular brush tool, you can see the stroke goes right with the cursor. Kind of wobbly. I went very slow. I was trying to be smooth. But if I use the dynamic brush tool, you can see that it moves a little bit slower, and it's kind of like I'm dragging the line on a string behind my cursor. So it helps your lines look smoother. If I go back to tool options, I can change exactly how slow that drag is. If I pull up the mass, I'm going to turn it all the way up so you can really see it. You can see this pink circle here is my cursor. And when I draw, I'm drawing this at the same exact speed as I did earlier, but you see how much slower it is and how much straighter that line is. And you can kind of see when I move, the little green is behind the pink. It's really hard to see, it's very small. And if I change the drag, it changes exactly how much the line drags. So when it's very high, the string you're dragging your stroke with is a bit more taut, and the lower it is, the looser it is, so it's a little more jagged and hard to control. The next tools we have to look at, I'm going to use footage from those videos for our graphic design series. The next one is the transform tool. You can transform a whole layer or a piece of a layer, and what this does is it allows you to change the size of something or the shape of something, the perspective. You can warp whatever it is you need to change. Maybe you drew something a little bit too long on one side and you just shorten it. You can warp it into the shape you need it to. It does have its limits. If you warp it too much, it will start to look a bit awkward. And the way you do change from size to warp is you right click. So it will select what's on that layer and you can right click and see the different versions you can change it to. This is also a great place to change to mirror horizontal. So if you want to change the orientation of something, you can do it that way. And that's usually the easiest way to do it. With free, you can change the size and you can rotate an image. Perspective lets you change perspective, so if you're looking down a long hallway, you might notice that stuff at the end of the hallway furthest from you looks smaller than it actually is. You can use the perspective tool in order to make whatever it is you need have that effect where it's smaller or larger at one end than it is at the other. The warp tool lets you warp things. I don't use cage and I don't use liquefy very much, and I don't use them at all in the next video, so I will leave those. The next tool is the move tool. It's a lot like the transform tool, only all it does is move. We talked about the gradient tool earlier. This is just a reminder that if you want to use a gradient, this is the tool you have to have selected. The eyedropper tool is a very useful tool. Usually when I set up something that I'm going to work on and I need lots of colors, I will set up a layer and put little blobs of each color that I'm going to use as my palette, like I would if I had a palette of watercolors or other paints in traditional artwork. So what you can do is click on it, and if I click the background, for example, you can see that my active color changed to that background color. So if you need to select a specific color out of a picture or an old artwork and you can't remember exactly what part of the color triangle it was in, you can just use an eyedropper tool. The shortcut for the eyedropper tool is very useful for me. I use it a lot. Is on a Mac is Command, on a Windows is Control. The next thing is the fill tool. You can fill shapes with the fill tool. These dotted lines down here, this entire section is the select tool. This selects squares, this selects circles. This is like the multi-corner tool from earlier. Just make sure that you meet the ends in order to close the selection, and this is the freehand selection tool. This magic wand selector, if you select anything in one color, it will do that selection for you, and I should have some footage to show you from some future videos. There is a bezier curve selection tool. I don't use it very much. I'll usually use a freehand tool instead, or the magic wand tool, but it works exactly the same way as the bezier curve tool. Down here is where you can zoom in and out of your canvas. You can also use the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. If you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can zoom in and out that way as well. Okay guys, like I said earlier, that's not an exhaustive tour of the Krita software, but that is a basic walkthrough of all of the tools that we're going to need in order to do some graphic design work in our next video. I do encourage that you play around a little bit with the software before you watch those videos. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can totally walk through those videos as a Krita newbie if you would like to, but it will be beneficial to you to have a feel for how everything kind of works before you jump right into graphic design with Krita. Well, that's it for this video. I will see you soon, where we are going to talk about surface design and do a little bit of surface design and graphic design of our own to make some custom patterns that we can have printed on fabric to make our very own custom outfits. As always, remember to like and subscribe to the library Facebook page. There's lots of other programs that we're doing right now for you guys to enjoy digitally. Stay safe, have fun, and craft on, everyone.